Hello, Chevre, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, und freilich, begashmis und beruchnis. I hope everyone is strong, healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Today is Asara B'Tevis, one of the fast days, and it's Erev Shabbos Kodesh Pashas Vayigash. First, I want to make a disclaimer straight away. If I'm not in my full power, like usual, I'm still fasting. In Australia, this is the longest fast day of the year, and it's a very unusual kviyas. We're fasting tonight till after Ma'ariv of Leil Shabbos Kodesh, so that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 9:30 p.m. So, I made this disclaimer, and I hope it won't affect the shir. Let's start first with a prayer. It's a fast day. It's a day we're meant to take things more seriously. As the Rambam says, Divrei Kivushin. So the prayer we'll say today is the prayer that we say on the day of Slichas. Ovinu Malkeinu, ein lonu melech, ein lonu melech, elo oto. We turn to Hashem, we say, Hashem, Father, our King, we only have one King, and that is you. I'm sorry I forgot to bring charity. These days, as long as the war is on, our hearts and minds are on Eretz Yisrael and our brothers and sisters, and we have to add. I should have brought tzedakah. I'm having mine and making a resolution that I will give tzedakah. Back to the prayer, we say Avinu Malkeinu, the two descriptive words that we talk to the Eibishter, and we address him. We address him as our Father, Avinu, and we also address him as Malkeinu, our King. And this touches on the two most fundamental aspects of our relationship with Hashem. There's an Avinu aspect of our relationship. He's our Father. And there's Malkeinu. And these are the two most basic themes and concepts in all of Yiddishkeit, as we'll see today. So, before we get to that, let us get to the Parsha and see the connection. What's Parshas Vayigash? Parshas Vayigash is talking about the encounter, finally the explosion, so to speak, the climax to the story that begins with Vayeshev. There's a sibling rivalry between Yosef and his brothers. Miketz is continuing, primarily focused on Yosef. He was put into prison at the end of Vayeshev, then becomes Miketz. He becomes a viceroy. The brothers travel to Egypt. Finally, we get to the climax in Vayigash. But in the words Vayigash itself, it also has one connotation, which is Pegisha, like this is the main encounter. This is we come to the so-called, in a certain sense, the climax, the closure of all the previous encounters. So Vayigash represents, on the one hand, a major confrontation, as we'll soon see. We're about to possibly have a tremendous conflict over here. On the other hand, Vayigash represents a reconciliation, as we'll discuss. But first, let's say three questions, and then we'll get to the crux of the issue as it's discussed in Chassidus and in Kabbalah. So, one question that we have, which is brought down in all the Chassidic discourses on this Parsha, is the contrast. When we talk about this reconciliation, so obviously we have some sort of friction over here, some tension over here between the two brothers, and what do they represent? Okay? And in the Maimorim, in the discourse, starting from the Alter Rebbe in this week's Parsha Vayigash, he discusses the contrast between the Parsha and the Haftarah. And that in the Parsha it says Vayigash Elav Yehuda, he talks to Yosef, and he calls Yosef Adoni, the master. And Yosef is the one who's in control because he has taken Binyamin as a hostage, and Shimon, and right now he's a king. He's the king of the superpower of that time. And what's Yehuda? One man, a small band with his brothers. So therefore Yosef is the one who's the king, the viceroy, the master, and he's holding all the cards. So Yehuda, in a way, is subservient to Yosef. He needs Yosef to try to go along with the plan so we won't have some sort of war or major battle. Which usually when there's a battle, there's a war, there's casualties. It won't be sweet. It won't be easy. It won't be a smooth ride. It won't be a walk in the park. It won't be a picnic in the park. On the other hand, we have the Haftarah. As Chassidus explains, the Haftarah is main Parsha, and the Haftarah speaks about a certain miracle that's going to happen when Mashiach comes, and that is also there's a relationship of Yehuda and Yosef, and it says in Yecheskel in the Haftarah that the Dvar Hashem Elai Leimor, the word of Hashem came to him, and Hashem said, take a stick of wood and write in it for Yehuda, take another stick and write it for Yosef, and then bring the two sticks together, and that both sticks will become one. And what's going to happen when it will become one? The pasuk continues later and says that this represents the idea of Avdi David Melech Aleim V'roye Echad L'chulam. After years and years of a split kingdom, there were Malchi Yehuda and Malchi Yisrael. Finally, Mashiach comes. There's going to be Melech HaMashiach, who's going to be from Malchus Beis David. So, just like in Vayigash, in the Parsha, it talks about how the two brothers come together, but in the Parsha, who is the dominant one? Yosef, and Yehuda is subservient to Yosef. In the Haftarah, we see that Yehuda becomes the dominant one. Melech HaMashiach, V'avdi David Nasi Aleim, he becomes the ruler. And they become united in the sense that Yosef is seen as the one that's the dominant one. So the famous question that the Alter Rebbe explains in Torah Parashat Vayigash, which that mimer is an unbelievable mimer, short, concentrated, it's like Kol HaTorah Kula. He explains what's the difference between what's in the Parsha and what's in the Haftarah. Okay, so that's one question, one issue. Why the difference? Then we have another very interesting question, which is that it says that in this week's Parsha also, that before Yaakov went down to Egypt, he sent Yehuda, Yehuda Shalach Lefanov, Lahiris Lefanov. And Rashi says one of the interpretations was that Yehuda was meant to establish a yeshiva. We have a klotz kasha. Why does Yehuda have to become the Rosh Yeshiva? Why is Yaakov sending Yehuda to establish a yeshiva? He could send Yosef, he doesn't have to send. Yosef's there already. And he's a goyen. He's a Torah scholar on the highest level. As it's also explained that Vatchiruach Yaakov Avim, when he sent the wagons to his father to pick up his father, when Yosef sent those wagons, one of the explanations is that he sent the wagons because the last subject they learned was about the Egla Rufa, which really means a calf. But Beremez, Egla could be connected to Agulos, which is wagons. So it was a sign to Yaakov that he remembered the last year that Yaakov taught Yosef 20 years ago, and he still remembered it and was fresh in his mind. So Yosef was an awesome Talmud Chacham Goyen. He could also open up the yeshiva. Why did he have to send Yehuda to be the Rosh Yeshiva? And last but not least, there's a very, very interesting thing that it says at the end of the Parsha that the Rebbe explains in a Sikha, and I'll soon say the source later, but something also very interesting. At the end of the Parsha, of Parshas Vayigash, it says that when there was the famine and after Yaakov went down to Egypt, and it describes the years of the famine, so it also describes how Yosef was able to acquire all the land for Paroi. And then the pasuk says, not once but twice, that everyone had to give away their land in order to be able to get food, and that's why Paroi was able to own the whole land. But then the pasuk says, "Rak admas hakoyinim loikona, ki choik lakoyinim eis Paroi," that the only land that Yosef was not able to buy up was that of the priests, since the priests had a food allotment from Paroi, and they lived off the allotment that Paroi gave them. They therefore did not have to sell the land. So we're talking about priests, Avodah Zarah, and they had a religious dispensation, I think it's called. They didn't have to pay and buy the food. They had an exemption. And then, not only does the Parsha end off and saying it once, it says it twice. By Yosem Oisel Yosef, 2 psukim later, 3 psukim later, whatever, 4 psukim later. Vayosam Moshe liYosef l'choik adayim azel admas parei. Aladmas Mitzrayim lefari lechoimish, rak admas hakoyin levadim lehoisa lefari. That Yosef made it a law concerning all the farmlands of Egypt that until that 1/5 of the produce belonged to Paroi, only the lands of the priests did not, according to this law, belong to Paroi. So why is it so important that the Torah emphasizes this point over here? And not only it says it once, it says it twice. The answer to this is a Moedik Chiddush, and the Rebbe speaks about it in Sefer HaSichas, Tafshin Nun, the Sich of Paroi, which some we're going to talk today comes from there. Now let's go back to the crux of the issue over here, and we'll answer all the questions we spoke about. What is the friction between Yosef and Yehuda? They represent the 2 major themes, as we said, Avinu Malkeinu. So there's 2 mashpiyim that I had, 2 major mentors in Chassidus. One was Rabbi Elkan, and the other was Rabbi Meir Tzibul. So they each had a favorite theme that ran through so many of the lessons. But Rabbi Elkan was all about Yichud and Bittul. And how the whole of Yiddishkeit is Yichud and Bittul. Yichud represents, for example, the relationship of a ben to an av, that when the child, a son of a king, let's say a prince, his purpose is not only to be obedient. His purpose, his point is he should understand what the king is talking about. He should understand the motives behind the edicts. He should understand what's behind the values and the virtues of what the king stands for. The king wants the son to be an extension of the father. The king wants the son to be able to be one day the ruler that will continue with the same vision and the same enlightenment that the father has and clarity. That's a father-child relationship. That's yichud. That means that the son is not only subservient to the father, of course he's also subservient. He would never rebel. But the point is he's united. It's something inside. It's something in reflecting the character traits of the son, that the character traits and the personality reflect the father. But then we have the father, who's not the father, but the king, servant relationship. Where over there, what does he want? He wants the servant to obey. Simple obedience. He doesn't care if the servant understands the why and the motive, what's behind it. And therefore, like I said many times, the difference between a teacher, when the teacher says, do you understand? Or when the king says, do you understand? Usually when the teacher says, do you understand? He wants the student to understand with his mind, with his intellect, and with his heart. But when the king says, do you understand? What the king means is, do you understand the instructions to do what I told you to do? So that's the difference between Avinu is a child-parent relationship, where the whole idea is bra kara davua. The child is an extension of the parent. His insides, his character traits reflect the character traits of the parent. Malkeinu is the subservient relationship, bittul. So there's yichud and bittul. This is a huge subject, and we can give 10 lessons on it. So therefore, we're just saying the crux of the idea. So Rabbi Yehuda used to say everything is yichud and bittul. By Rabbi Melech, it always was, this is mitzad giluyim, mitzad etzem, that things the way they are in the revealed way. Let's say that's a discussion about the difference between, according to Kabbalah, there's Zoh and there's Malchus. There's those traits that represent talent, skills, depth, beauty. That's giluyim. Then you have etzem. Etzem you have, which is basic, foundational, essential. And I'm not going to get into all the other, all the subjects in Chassidus where Rabbi Melech will go, in Giluyim, when you look at it, in Giluyim, the way things seem to be on the outside, so it comes out one way. Aber in Etzem, but you look at it because of the essence, it comes out another way. And over here, these two concepts come out to the same thing. What's going to be is Yosef represents the idea of in Giluyim. Yosef Meloshnei Safa. Yosef was the shining star that everything becomes dull in comparison to Yosef. He's a super genius. He's super talented. He's a superstar. And that's what Yosef represents, Meloshnei Safa. You look at him, you see that he's larger than life. He's overbearing in a good way. He's blessed in every single way. Yosef Meloshnei Safa, it looks grand, it looks glorious, it's growing, it's constantly growing. Just when you thought that you saw the limits of his talent, but wait, there's more. That's all Yosef. Yehuda represents acknowledgement, haidah, admitting acquiescence, to yield, to give in. So just like this is Giluyim, we look at Yosef, we see something shining, something fantastic, something exciting. And we look at Yosef, we look at something steady, something consistent, but without the shine, without the glory, without the super talent. So therefore, in Avodas Hashem, the Avodah of Yosef represents the Avodah of Koiches Pnimiyim, enlightenment, passion, excitement. That's Yosef. And Yehuda represents Kabbalah Sel, obedience. And this is the famous discussion. Let's say, for example, if we talk about consistency versus creativity, or discipline versus inspiration. It's a very, very, very important subject. Time is running, so we can't get into the whole story now. But we need both. Where do we see it, for example, also in the concept of, just to give you an example with the Alter Rebbe, what comes first? What's more important? So this is going to be the answer to the question of the difference between the Parsha and the Haftarah. In the Maimer, the Alter Rebbe explains what's the difference between Zman HaGolus and Zman HaBayis, and what's the difference between Mikdash and Mishkan, which is the time of Golus. The Parsha is connected more to the time of Golus. The Haftarah is connected more to the Geula and to the Beis HaMikdash. See there, I'm not getting into it. What I would just want to bring out one point from the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe, which is beautiful. He brings with this understanding, we'll understand the difference between a contradiction between two verses. One verse says, what comes first? Shamayim or Oretz? What came first, the heavens or the earth? In one verse it says, Eretz v'Shamayim, planet Earth, this world, this planet, comes before all the other worlds, the spiritual worlds. Oretz represents the lowest world. Shamayim, heaven, represents the higher worlds. But then there's the pasuk in the Torah, Bereshis bara Elokim, Eis HaShamayim, Veis Oretz. It says Shamayim before Oretz. So what's the difference? And over here the Alter Rebbe explains there's the difference between Shoirish and Poil. There's a difference the way the things are in their source, which really means what the ultimate purpose is, which means Etzem. And then there's the way they are in Giluyim, that's what means Poil, the way it works out, which means like this. The Alter Rebbe explains, when it comes to Poil, the way things have to work regularly, is that first you have to have Shamayim, you have to have the spiritual realm, then you can have the action, then you can have the lower realm. And say there's Shtalshalos, when we speak about the spiritual worlds, there's Atzilos, Bri, Yitzira, there's a whole order of descent. Since this world is the last stop in the lowest level, therefore it comes last. And what comes first is the plans, the ideas, the motive. Just like everything in life, you have to have a blueprint, and then you can carry it out. So before the world came into existence, we first have to have the art, the idea, and the feelings that are involved behind the actual creation. Before you create, you have to have machshava before maisa. First you have to have thought, then you can have the action. But then we say, on the other hand, seif maisa ala machshava tchila. Why is there a whole seder shtalshalos? The whole reason is the order of the descent of the worlds is because this is the purpose of it all. That's what it's really all about. And Mashiach comes, we're going to see how this world is the greater world and what this world was all about. And just to give another example, which I remember hearing Taka from Reb Melech, you have a teacher and you have a student. So the teacher teaches the student, and then the student becomes developed. So who came first, the teacher or the student? So if you look at it in Giluyim, like a regular order in Poil, it seems the actual development, the actual chronological order, the way it seems superficially, is first the teacher had to teach, the words come out of his mouth, and then it goes into the student, and then the student toils with the words of the teacher, and then he becomes developed to who he's meant to become. But when you think about it deeper, why did the teacher teach what he taught? It's because he first thought of the student. What sort of student do I want to fashion? What sort of student am I interested in developing? After he first thought about the student, that the whole purpose was the student, then he was mashpia with his mashpia. Soif Maisa, with the end of the purpose of what it was all about, that's what starts in the beginning. As the famous saying goes, begin with the end in mind. So when we talk about the begin with the end in mind, as the Alter Rebbe says, in Shaydish, in Etzem, Maisa is higher. Yehuda is higher. Because the whole purpose of everything is to be a regular person that follows orders and does what you're meant to do. So again, if we talk, it's like the same idea with the Maisa and Kavana. There's intention, and we say mitzvahs b'loi Kavana k'guf b'loi neshama. On the one hand, we're saying a person whose whole religion seems to be like it's just action, and he doesn't have the inspiration, he doesn't have the passion, so it's like dead, it's like a dead body. On the other hand, we say, the whole tachlis is, hamaisa u'ikir. In the end of the day, you can have all the kavanas in the world, but if you don't do the action, it's nothing worth. But if you do the action without the passion, there's still something. That's the main thing. As the Alter Rebbe discusses this subject at length in chapter 38 of Tanya. So, now this is the difference between the Parsha and the Haftarah. The Parsha is the way it is now in Giluyim, which means until Mashiach comes, Yosef, what shines more, what's more talented, what looks greater is higher and comes first. Yehuda has to be subservient to Yosef, just like the bricklayer, as we'll soon see, has to be nullified to the architect. We'll soon talk about that as another analogy. When Mashiach comes, we're going to reveal how Seif Ma'aseh Mashav Tchila, the lowest thing, the highest thing is really what seemed to be lower, but action, Maisa, just like in the world we say, Nesava, about the worlds, we say Nesava that the ultimate purpose was this world. So too when it comes to serving Hashem, the ultimate purpose is simple Kabbalah Sayil obedience to do what the Eibishter wants. Nasa koydem l'nishma. Obedience, nasa, action, comes before nishma, before understanding. Okay. That answers one question. Now let's go back to the Rosh Hashiva. So this is a famous question, and it's answered. There's many answers to this, so I'll just mention one or two quickly because it's gishmak in our service of Hashem. One answer the Rebbe gives in Likutei Sichos Chelik Gimel, that because Yosef was a Mishnah L'Melech, and he was involved, the financial minister, and he was involved, he's running a whole country. So therefore, he's not going to be solely dedicated to learning Limud Torah and to the students. When you want a Rosh Hashiva, the good Rosh Hashiva is the one who knows of nothing else in his life except Torah and the Bachrim and the students. And that's one reason why Yaakov needed Yehuda as a Rosh Hashiva, not Yosef. But then there's another answer, based on what we're talking about now. Another Gishmak answer which is brought down is because Yehuda was the one that said, Ki avdecha orev esanar, as we had in this week's Parsha. We have. Because he put himself in the line. He was ready to go on Mesiras Nefesh, come what be, so that Binyamin should be able to be saved and be brought back to his father. So, Midah connected Midah, he was rewarded, entrusted with this responsibility. Orev, Arevus. You want to have a good Rosh Hashiva? You have to have that Rosh Hashiva who's ready to have Mesiras Nefesh, which, by the way, Yehuda represents the Avodah of Mesiras Nefesh. Again, not talent, not brains, not passion, but simple commitment. That's what Mesiras Nefesh means. And that's what Yehuda represents. Action-oriented, to get the job done. There's no other option. That's the idea of Yehuda. To get it done, no matter what. Yosef represents the brains of the outfit, tell you how it should be done. What's the best way it should be done. Therefore, we need the brains that tells you how to do it. But in the end of the day, who carries it through? Yehuda. Because that's what it means, Moida also. He bends. He yields. He'll do whatever has to be done to get it done. He's going to give in and put himself aside, Mesiras Nefesh. So that's the second reason why he has to be the Rosh Hashiva. He's the only one that actually went through this idea of Ki Avdecha Orev Esanar. He put himself on the line of Mesiras Nefesh, and that's what sort of Rosh Hashiva we need. But now we're going to come to a third explanation, which connects with what I said before, the answer to the question about the priests. According to the Rebbe, and this is in that Sikha of Sefer HaSichas Tafshin Nun, you'll see there, even though the pasuk doesn't really imply this so much, it seems to be that Paroi gave this exemption to the priests, but the Rebbe says clearly that mitzad the avodah of Yosef, there's in Esinas Mokum, there's still a room for something of klippus. Since it's not mamish etzem, since it's not mamish built on bittul, total selflessness, we see also talent, so therefore such an avodah could bring to giving room for priests of another religion. In other words, it's a problem. So in Andrevete, but dakas the dakas in a subtle way, through the Avodah of Yosef, we can come to something which is still connected and gives room for the priests of Egypt. Mashenkin through the Avodah of Yosef, which is just a lakus, Yechid Liyachtach, pure bittul, no talent, just bittul. From him can't come such a thing. And that's why with Yehuda Shalom of Leilas L'Geishna, it's a level which is not connected to anything of this world. And through that Avodah, through the Avodah of Yehuda, Haidah gives no room for any sort of thing except the Eibishter. And by the way, you can see this also, just to give you an example from my personal life. There was some mashpiyim, let's say Reb Nissen Emenov or Reb Mendel Futterfass. Their way of teaching as mashpiyim, they pushed Tanya Balpeh. So their shiurim, their lectures, were not always so amazing. But bottom line is, in their students, they inculcated and they trained Tanya Balpeh, learn Tanya Balpeh, learn Tanya Balpeh. They would call over a student and say, did you learn Tanya Ba'art or not? That's one sort of mashpiyah. And many of the mashpiyim in the past were like that. Spiritual guidance councils. But then you had mashpiyim like Rabbi Yoel and the Melech. Their point was, don't get me wrong, chas v'shalom, I don't want to bring out that through their avodah there's room to give room for something that's wrong. That's not what I want to bring out. I just want to bring out that contrast of two sorts of approaches, two ways of teaching. Rabbi Melech Tzibel's way of teaching, Rabbi Yoel's way of teaching, was to show you the beauty and the enormity of Torah's Chassidus. Of course, they were both completely living role models of what it means to be a Hasidic Jew, Moiridik. But at the same time, what they impressed upon a student was more connected to the Torah's Chassidus. Wow, look at what Torah's Chassidus is. The ideology of Chassidus. Reb Melech in his way and Rabbi Yoel in his way. But they didn't really demand from the students talking about the hard work of just Chazer, Tanya, Balpeh. It was a different idea. Every teacher, you have many teachers. From this teacher you learn this, from that teacher you learn that. So I'm saying in this case, we're saying in the story of Vayigash, we're saying the point is to have the Rosh Hashiva like Yehuda, not like Yosef. Sometimes you need the Rosh Hashiva like Yosef, who'll show you the depth and the profundity and the brilliance of Torah like nobody else. Yehuda doesn't have that. Yosef has that. Anyways, just to give you another example of Yichud and Bittul and Etzem and Giluyim, I mentioned an architect and a bricklayer. Who's more important? And I'll give you another example. A soldier, let's say, or a general, or an officer. So let's say we take the architect and the bricklayer. Obviously, you can't build a building if you don't have a blueprint. And who makes the blueprint? The architect. But without the bricklayer, you ain't going to have a building. So who's more important? Good question. But one thing we see for sure, that there are more bricklayers than architects. So again, if we're talking about talent, there's very few architects. They're special. They're amazing. And the same thing which I mentioned before, the synthesis of consistency and creativity. So creativity, less people have creativity because it's a special gift. But consistency, you'll find more people. Because to be a consistent person, more people could train themselves because it's more basic to be consistent. Now, similar over here. So, there's more bricklayers than architects. Architects is a special skill. You have to go to university for many, many years to be an architect. So again, in the end of the day, the tachlis is to be the bricklayer, because without the bricklayer you won't have the house, and they're the ones that carry it through. The one who finishes the job is the most important thing, etc. But in the same way, on the same token, it doesn't take away from the architect that without the architect, you're also not going to have a proper building. Anyways, another example is you could say a soldier and an officer. That really, the truth is, what's more important, soldiers or officers? Soldiers. Because the theme of a soldier, the essence of a soldier, is that he's ready to lay down his life to do what's meant to be done. And he has self-sacrifice. An officer is because he's specially skilled, he knows more, he trained in a certain area. But the truth is, if we look at it deeper, even the officer never really graduates from being a soldier. And really, the ultimate... So on the one hand, if you're talking about special people, you say, oh, he's not only just a private. Sorry, I meant the private. He's not only a private, he has this skill, that skill, the other skill. But the truth is, in the end, the real essence, the idea of a soldier, is the idea of obedience. And that not only obedience, whatever the mission is, to the extent that he's willing to give up his life. And that's really the greatest, greatest virtue of a soldier. Now you're going to say, but that doesn't make you a sergeant, a colonel, a major, or a general. Correct! But that's the most basic thing, and that's the most important thing. But do we need generals? Do we need sergeants? Of course. Etzem ungiluyim. Anyways, so that answers, now we answered all the questions, the difference between the Haftarah and the Parsha, and the difference between why did the Torah emphasize this point that the priests were able to get out of it, because we want to bring out that from the Avodah of Yosef can come such a thing, and that's why only Yehuda was the one that was able to be the Rosh Hashiva. Okay, the connection to Asar B'Tevis is obvious. It's very, very late, and the whole idea of Asar B'Tevis is it's the beginning of what will lead to Tisha B'Av, the destruction of the temple, and Asar B'Tevis means that it's the beginning of the idea of Pirud, the separation, the period of Havas, the separation that brought about ultimately that there should be this idea of the Churban Beis Hamikdash. So on Asar B'Tevis today, we have to talk about reconciliation, Yehuda and Yosef together, and that's the connection between Parshas Vayigash and Asar B'Tevis. And the Rebbe, many, many sichas, brings out the point that one of the lessons we take from this parsha, I think it was Tafshin Beis, the Rebbe said, everybody is either more of a Yosef person, more talent, creativity, inspirational. Some people like to be inspired at all times. Some people talk about the virtues of inspiration. Rabbi, inspire me. Inspiration is a great thing. Some people talk about more, not inspiration, discipline, consistency. I don't know if I mentioned it before. That's the difference between Tmidim Kisidran or Musafim Kilchasan. Each one is so important. One person is more in the direction. What's his quality? Consistency, reliability. But it might be dry. It might be limited. And the other person is creativity. He's amazing, amazing talent. Head and shoulders above the average person. So this is what the Rebbe says, is the Avodah of Vayigash. Each one, if you're more of a Yehuda person, more of a obedient Eved, then become more like a Ben. Try to work with your intellect, to understand more, to think about things more, to meditate. And that represents that we're going through what we're saying over here in the Parsha, whether the Parsha is Yehuda being more subservient to Yosef, or the Haftarah, which is Yosef being more subservient to Yehuda, as a preparation to Mashiach. We have to come together. And how do we come together? By each one of us going the other way to make us more united. There shouldn't be a split. There's what you aspire to, what your inspiration is, and then there's action. If you're a person that's more inspirational, try to become more action-oriented. If you're a person that's more action-oriented, try to become more passionate, try to become more exciting, etc. And that means a unification. And the same thing that's going on now in the war. Everyone's saying, Yachtov, Yachad Ninatzeach. That everyone realizes that before the war, there was some sort of separation, protest, whatever. We're not placing blame anywhere. But there was this idea. So as we all know from Chassidus, everything starts from within. Within us, there's also a discord. Whether our level of intellect and emotions is according to the measure of our actions or not. And this is what it means. In us, we have to affect the unification between our Yehuda, our inner Yehuda, and the inner Yosef. This will bring about a unification in Klal Yisrael between the Yehuda and the Yosefs, the architects and the bricklayers, the scholars, the Bnei Torah, the Yisachar and the Zvulun, the businessmen, etc., etc., etc. Whatever sense of friction or conflict there exists will become united, and this will also cause in Klal Yisrael general unification, starting from within in every single person, then throughout Klal Yisrael, and then throughout the whole world. There'll be an union of unification. V'hoisal Hashem Amlucha, Poda b'Shalom Nafshi, will affect the Shalom in ourselves, and this will bring about the Shalom in Eretz Yisrael. Begula mitzvah shleima, take of miad mamish, posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, your man in Melbourne.